financial environment to explore topics that are not usually explored by economists. And he's going to be sharing one of those today with us. What if Fulgencio Batista had been black? And further ado.
How long do I have?
19 minutes.
19 minutes, okay, very good. First of all, thank you very much for your presence here. I know that Saturday is a difficult day for being at a conference, but I really appreciate your presence here. As you notice, my question is, what if Fulgencio Batista had been black? And I want to give you the answer to that question right away. It is that history in the 20th century, in the 21st century, would have been written differently. And so the motivation for me for writing this paper is simply that, you know, I have been reading books about Cuba written in the 21st century, and what I find is that no one, or practically no one mentions the fact that Batista was a man of mixed race. And of course, if people do not mention the fact that Batista was a man of mixed race, what happens is that it is very easy to make the assertion that there was a tremendous amount of discrimination, racial discrimination in Cuba. Therefore, that is really the topic that I am trying to address. Now, I begin with two commentaries. One says, el dominio de Batista sobre la vida política trajo ciertos cambios para los negros cubanos. El ex sargento era obviamente un mulato, y a pesar de su traición a la revolución de 1933, Batista realizó, proponiéndoselo o no, varias tareas de importancia revolucionaria. Y esto es, this was said by Lourdes Casal, who was, you know, a supporter of Fidel Castro. And then I have another mention by Enrique Oltuski, and of course Oltuski worked for Fidel Castro, and also he realized that Batista, number one, had a very poor background and was also a mulatto. And incidentally, I don't know how many people know that Oltuski graduated from the University of Miami. So he's an alumnus of the University of Miami. So anyway, then we move on. Here you see a picture, a very famous picture of Batista that came out in Time magazine. And the next one is the two Batistas. Now, who is the second person there? Can anyone recognize that second person? It's very interesting because Nicolás Guillén Batista. In Cuba, people never refer to Nicolás Guillén as Nicolás Guillén Batista, but he was a Batista too. And one of the interesting things is that whereas Fulgencio Batista came from a very, very poor family, Nicolás Guillén came from one of the wealthiest mulatto families in Cuba. As a matter of fact, Nicolás Guillén, his father was a senator in Cuba. So this is not recognized, and it's kind of interesting because Nicolás Guillén receives a lot of positive publicity, but of course Fulgencio Batista does not, with good reason in part. But it is never mentioned in Cuba that Nicolás Guillén was Nicolás Guillén Batista. Here we see Batista with his wife and the Cuban ambassador to Washington. And of course, it's one of the few pictures where you can see Batista's skin color very clearly, because you can see it right next to his wife, who was a Cuban, his first wife, and also to another Cuban ambassador to Washington. Here we see Batista with the American ambassador, This is during the Truman administration, because again, many people today think that Batista is associated somehow with the Republicans, but that is not the case. Batista was really associated with the Democrats. And it was Truman who accepted that, the new government of Batista during the dictatorship. So we're going to see a few other famous Cubans here. Martín Morúa Delgado, who was president of the Senate in Cuba, the first president of the Senate in Cuba. He was a black man. Here we have Juan Gualberto Gómez, the most famous Cuban intellectual in the 20th century, and also a senator. Here we see Charles Curtis. Now, people don't know who Charles Curtis is, which is really strange, because that is as if one were to say that you did not know who Obama was. Charles Curtis was an Indian American, and he was Vice President of the United States under Hoover. Not only was he Vice President of the United States, he was the head of the Senate in the United States. And he was a very, very famous man in the United States, even as a child. And I will mention that later on in the presentation. Of course, the face looks very familiar, doesn't it? That is José Martí's son, José Francisco Martí Isayas Bazán. Why is this important? Well, it is important because in Cuba there was what was called a race war. A war supposedly against black people in 1912. And who conducted that war? 3 men. One of them was José Martí's son. And I will mention that later on in the presentation. So here I have a list of famous Afro-Cubans, and I want to pay particular attention to the first two, Gustavo Urrutia and Gaston Vaquero. Now, what is so extraordinary about these two men? They were black or mulattoes, but interestingly enough, Urrutia was an editor of the Diario de la Marina in the 1930s. And as a matter of fact, it was Urrutia who opened up the doors to Nicolás Guillén so that he could publish in the Diario de la Marina. And that was when Nicolás Guillén became famous after publishing in the Diario de la Marina. And of course, Gaston Vaquero was also black or mulatto, and a very big supporter of Batista. And as a matter of fact, if you look back at when Batista was buried, he was there. The other people, most of you would know, though I am surprised that young people coming from Cuba, you mentioned the name Plácido, and they have never heard of Plácido. And of course, you wonder why they have never heard of Plácido. And of course, you mentioned someone also like José White. And young Cubans don't know who José White was, which is kind of extraordinary. All right, so basically, my paper covers 7 points. The first point is Fulgencio Batista did not have a dark enough complexion to be called black. This has allowed recent popular writers and scholars to ignore his Afro-Cuban roots. The second point, ignoring Batista's race and claiming that race is a social construct has allowed modern writers to claim that there was widespread racial discrimination in Cuba. Third, this paper claims both that Batista was a man of mixed race and that race is not a social construct. Then, race can be defined in terms of genetic markers, the way it is done now by scientists all over the world, including those in Cuba. And I make reference in my paper to an extraordinarily good paper, a study that was conducted in Cuba recently about race using genetic markers. We also argue that charges of widespread racism in all Cuba are unfounded and in disagreement with the view of highly respected scholars. Then we challenge the assertion of modern writers who ignore the historical evidence about the War of 1912, which was conducted by Jose Marti's son, and disregard the fact that Afro-Cubans held political power and played significant roles in Cuban culture. And finally, we briefly compare racial policies in the US and Cuba, showing that the democratic process in America was far more compromised than in Cuba, especially in the first half of the 20th century. I am going to go through these points very briefly, but in reverse order. So, first of all, we're going to compare racial policies in the US and in Cuba in the first half of the 20th century. And, for example, I mentioned that during that period, there was no black man in the US Senate. And, of course, there were many blacks in the Cuban Senate. There were no mixed-race men elected president of the country during that time. Batista was elected president in 1940 in free elections. He was a strong man in his 30s, freely elected president in the 40s, and of course a terrible dictator in the 50s. I'll move on to make other points. A lot of people here in America do not realize that blacks in the South, by law, could not register to be Democrats until the end of the 1940s. From the 1880s to 1940s, here black people could not register as Democrats by law. Of course, in Cuba, we had the president of the Senate that you saw. The very first president of the Senate was a black man. Batista was a mulatto. So black people acquired power in Cuba. I want also to notice that Republicans did not get elected to southern legislatures because of the repression of black votes in southern states. Okay, let me move on. Second point, we challenge the assertion of modern writers who ignore the historical evidence about the War of 1912 and disregard the fact that Afro-Americans had held political power. Okay? I have mentioned, Senators Morua, Gomez, also Senator Guillen, the father of Nicolás Guillen, who was a senator. The number of people, black people, who held political power in Cuba was very significant. Okay, we also argue that the charges of widespread racism in all Cuba are unfounded and in disagreement with the view of highly respected scholars. Now, what scholars am I talking about? Well, I am talking about a very liberal Jorge Dominguez, who in his book says in Cuba there was no discrimination against blacks, either before or after the revolution. I'm talking about Hugh Thomas, who mentions that this discrimination was almost inexistent in Cuba except with regard to the clubs, to the social clubs. And of course, Herminio Porter Vidal makes exactly the same point. And of course, when people say, well, there was discrimination in Cuba against blacks in clubs, You have to ask the question, why would blacks want to belong to social clubs where people did not like them? In the United States, how many social clubs were there where blacks and whites intermixed? How many white universities in the United States accepted blacks as students? Was the movie industry integrated in America the way the theater industry was integrated in Cuba? Remember the very famous Rita Montaner was sought after every single Cuban theater, was one of the most famous Cuban singers and actresses. Can race be defined in terms of genetic markers? And of course, the argument is that there was a professor, Professor Lewontin, who said, no, you cannot do that. And he used 17 markers to show that. Well, it turns out that now you can use not only 17 markers. For example, the study that I will mention about Cuba uses 228 markers, and race can be exactly defined with those markers. But how do we think of race from a scientific point of view? Okay, 3 ways. I am running out of time, so I will mention only the third one, which is relevant here. Racial groups who have a common ancestry from specific geographic regions. The common ancestry of the Cuban people originated in Cuba, West Africa, and the Americas. So, this is quite fascinating. In Cuba, in 2013, there was a study using genetic markers. And what it found was that if you take a look at men, the atoms behind those men, 80% European, only 20% black, or from Africa, from Afro sources. If you take a look at women, the story is totally different. The eaves of the women in Cuba, 40% black, 40% Native American, and only 20% of European origins. And, most Cubans that I know here in Miami, have their DNA tested, and they say, my God, I have Native American genes. It is very common. And people do not realize that. This paper, of course, claims that Batista never identified himself as a man who was white, or as a man of mixed race. He just said he was a Cuban. And here I go through exactly why it is very easy to argue that Batista was a man of mixed race. I mean, you have seen his picture and so on. In the Holguín province, according to this study that I mentioned, done in Cuba, in Holguín province, 58% of the population in that province have Native American roots. 58% is the province in Cuba that has the highest Native American roots. So, ignoring Batista's race has allowed modern writers to claim that there was widespread racial discrimination in Cuba. And you read modern books about Cuba, or even the Encyclopedia Americana, the Britannica, and it doesn't mention at all that Batista was a man of mixed race. I mean, it's really incredible to me. So finally, I do want to mention this. What is the lesson to be learned from all of this? And I mention here, the lesson to be learned by the exiled community is that it needs to be led in its fight against communism by a man or woman whose racial background is similar to those of Batista. People vote for and support political leaders based on racial identity, both in Cuba and in the United States. Both Martí and Maceo were wrong in thinking that race could be eliminated from political discourse. And I finish. Fulgencio Batista did not have a dark enough complexion to be considered a black man. This has allowed recent popular writers and scholars to ignore his Afro-Cuban roots. So, and actually, in conclusion, if Batista had been dark enough to be a black man, in other words, that could not ignore the fact that he had Afro ancestry, Cuban history would be told in very different ways today. But let us always remember that he had Afro ancestry and that the Cuban population in the 1940s deserved credit for electing a man of mixed race in free elections. Thank you.
For a long standard practice, we will hear all the speakers before discussing the papers and then having a discussion. The next speaker will be Martin. Martin is distinguished diplomat and human rights advocate, and currently is the director of the Magda Haber program for human rights and diplomacy at FIU, and he will speak to us about Haber's legacy in Cuba.
Good morning, everybody. The organizers that they decided to include my companies into your important debate. I had an honor and opportunity to address this assembly already 3 years ago. So it's my second election. And I published in 2014 a paper, it was during the proceedings, under the title, Where Are We? The State of Negotiation on a New Treaty Between the EU and Cuba. So in a way, I will be following this train of thought here today too. 3 years passed, and now we have a new treaty, and we have all the debate around that treaty here in Miami and around the world. But I would love to start from a slightly different angle. My primary focus will be here the past Czech international activities vis-à-vis Cuba. And the question is, can these activities offer us something relevant, offer something inspirational for your own current Cuban debates? For the morning, the bulk of the text I submitted to the organizers of this conference was written 6 months ago. So in that respect, it's still a work in progress. What I plan to do is to add, to update it, because obviously time is passing quickly, and we have many important facts on the ground to be thought through and analyzed in this current context. But let me start from our Czech experience. Obviously, there is a pending question here. Why Czechs are so much keen to enter into Cuban debates? What is in it for them? I could speak a lot about that. It has something to do with our own exposure to similar, I would say, deadly radiation, from your own Cuban experience, and also our experience after our miraculous liberation that took place in 1989, some time ago already. What I would like to look at is a very concrete thing. I was honored to be part of most visible Czech foreign political action that really was a kind of Rubicon cross for the Parliament, and I think from this moment on the Czech Republic is perceived with all our traditions of relationship between Cuba and former communist Czechoslovakia. On the list of not very friendly countries, I would almost dare to say some sort of enemies. What I'm talking about is our diplomatic action in the Commission for Human Rights in the years 1999-2001. Just for historical record, the year before, the same resolution that traditionally was presented by the government or by the diplomats of the United States failed. They lost the vote. Obviously, I can imagine that still could find in the State Department the analytic explanations why it happened. And Cuban government at that moment thought that thing was over. That now this nuisance, which was traditionally perceived by the Cuban government as a part of an eternal and ongoing struggle between monster in the north and a small, brave Republic of Cuba defending its resolution. But we decided, and I'm not going to go into details why, to bring war back to the game and do it ourselves in the 1999. Actually, it was very interesting how we got into that. It was not certainly the US government that asked us to step in, as Cuban propagandists later tried to say to the world, but we were approached by Cuban dissidents, or those intermediaries between them and us. I remember I was deputy foreign minister Tom in the foreign ministry in Prague in late 1998, and I said immediately yes, not knowing how difficult and challenging this thing was going to be. But to make a long story short, we won this thing 3 times in a row. We got the votes, you can say, what the heck of them, does it matter? Because, you know, it's just a diplomatic struggle without, I would say, not too much impact in the real world. But still we did, and I would like to present you the lessons from that diplomatic operation, because I really believe that these lessons are relevant today and should be taken into consideration in any strategic debate how to push things forward in the situation today. Lesson number 1. Cuba turned out to be, and still is, a very powerful and strong opponent in such diplomatic games. And it's operating on the premise of being a kind of world power sui generis. And you please take that thing into consideration, because it's a big question for historians or analysts of Cuban situation. Measured by its economic performance, Cuba, well, Castro's Cuba, has been a disaster from the very beginning. All decisions taken plainly wrong and destructive. But on the contrary, measured by the capability to operate effectively within the international system created after the Second World War, Fidel Castro really managed to push Cuba into a world power. Very briefly, the points we look at: the Cuban participation in the non-alliance movement, in positioning itself not in East-West connection, but North-South. And in this respect, Cuba has managed to build a very efficient, huge network of diplomatic representations, embassies around the world. So whenever Cuba was to disseminate their messages, right or wrong, they had tools in their hands, and they had a really trained and very well prepared professional diplomats to work on that. I don't need to mention Cuban military operations outside of Cuba, in Africa, and also quite interesting and robust South-South cooperation, doctors and all other things that really managed to build a kind of a network of clientelistic states of Cuba around the world, and sympathizers with the main or general or known messages of Fidel Castro government. That was lesson number one. Lesson number two, our diplomatic operation within what I call the Bermuda Triangle. Because obviously, if we had to have a chance to win, we had to operate within a group of so-called like-minded states, that they would cast their yes vote in the end of this game. Who were they? First of all, the United States was the partner number one, with sometimes too robust way of doing things in the international arena. And we certainly could not make it without their open, hidden support. But what was the problem of concept number one of the US administration then, and it is still there till today? Obviously, the problem was created by economic embargo, and the language that economic aspect of human rights debate would be reflected in that resolution. Please don't take it as it is in international context. It was not just a matter whether embargo is good or right, but whether this debate has something to do in the debate about human rights. Because what was the problem was the causal chain to be created between economic situation in Cuba and its commitments of fulfillment of international obligations in the area of human rights. No state should be allowed to say we violate human rights because we are in dire economic situation. So it was an internationalist argument more on the side of the United States. And just for the record, the first year, 1999, it was still an Albright in the State Department. And I remember my partner, he was a well-trained human rights lawyer. So it was not, I would say, sometimes heavy-handed, robust Republican approach that started next year, but they basically picked up all the arguments from that. So it was the US position. And then we had our other partners, Europeans and Latin Americans. And for them, obviously, some sort of economic language was must. Those who have been trained in international human rights discourse know that the rights to development, economic aspect of human rights is a relevant topic. So they wanted to, they were understanding the US position, but they still wanted some sort of language to address the issue. It looked like a mission impossible for a moment. We had to make compromises, and compromises is something what is very relevant here, and we did it in the end. The conclusion was that our partners were ready to put up their arguments to our debate, but still they didn't want to see the project fail. They wanted to succeed, so they were able to make these compromises. And very last lesson is our Havelian approach was successful in this situation. What the Havelian approach was, I see René Gomez-Manzano there, just for the record, one of the persons, there were 4 political prisoners explicitly mentioned in our submission to the Commission for Human Rights. It was René and 3 others. And so our maybe argument was naive, straightforward, based on the solidarity with the dissidents. And then I can testify through my experience in communicating these messages with diplomats, well-fed, rich people sitting in Geneva and discussing the resolution following the instructions of their governments. They maybe had already their position decided before, but they listened to us. They allowed that this language was penetrating the international discourse. They simply could not afford to ignore it entirely. So it was a kind of potential build here, which is still there and which needs to be used today properly. So let's go to the current situation. I think that there are 5, I just put on paper 5 basic questions that are of your concern today. First is, what are the possible scenarios for Cuba's future after the retirement of Raul Castro announced for February 1918? That's a question I think everybody is now dealing with. And part of that is question number 2, what role the independent civil society, democratic opposition, can and should play in this process. And then questions relevant from my perspective. What can the international community do? For sure not to shape, determine the Cuban future, it's up to you, Cubans, but help to create an enabling environment that the Cuban people can decide democratically about its future in the 21st century. Fourth, is there any space for some new forms of transatlantic cooperation in this matter? Can democratic countries of Europe and Americas work together and coordinate their activities? And now, obviously, a specific European question. What can we expect from the preliminary application of a new treaty between the EU and Cuba that replaced so-called some common position to dissatisfaction of many Cubans? And I would like to argue that we might be looking, I would suggest them just look at that from strategic perspective and not just from the perspective of principles you are so determined to believe. The basic map, where we are. Certainly we are not in 1989, we are in 2017, and I will certainly have no ambition to describe you where we are now in detail. There are differences, geopolitical shifts of power, new situation, and all of that must be taken into consideration in the Cuban debate. The position of the current Cuban government, I can guarantee to you that they are studying this new scene very carefully and defining their policies. The main reason or the objective of their policies is to do some sort of succession without changing the nature of the system. To pass the power from one generation to another and not to open up to society. That's also clear. If you look at the international map in this context, certainly it looks like that they want to continue with this successful Fidel Castro's revolutionary policy that worked in the past 5 decades for them. They are looking at Russia, China, Iran, and obviously Venezuela used to be an Bolivarian socialism for the 21st century, their natural partner. Is it a good strategy? Is it a realistic proposition? What I'm saying, and that's where I'm betting my money on, not. It's essentially important that Cuba is put into the different context, into the context of the Bermuda Triangle. I tried to describe before. The United States is a major partner. Historical reasons are here very clearly stated. European Union and obviously rational context of Latin America. Where we are now with that, I need to skip because I don't have too much time. The US debate is an extremely important element here. I would warn those who believe that you can paint it black and white and you can choose your preferences, Obama and our negation of Obama by Trump. I think that something new has started with Obama, maybe not efficient enough, something that really needs to be corrected, but not repealed and repealed and replaced by something, and not just by sloganery, not by enchant. European Union, we have this new treaty that made many Cubans to make a very critical, tough remarks on Europe, traitors, those who simply abandoned us because of their interest in their businesses. I think it's wrong. Pedro Fuentes is here. He is representing Cubano Encuentro Nacional, which means an effort to unify Cuban democratic opposition. And he was in Strasbourg when the European Parliament was debating about that, and attached to the treaty, and read that please well, and non-legislative but very important interpretative resolution that puts certain limitations on those pragmatics that like to make business and forget about human rights. This is an extremely important step forward that can have important consequences in the next months and years. European Union is ready to forward some financial support to the relationship, and here the question is whether this money will be strategically used, spent, and whether there will be some measurable effects of these activities. So again, I think that not in black and white, very important, and participation of Cuban civil society is key in that respect. I don't want to speak about Latin America, you know what's going on in Venezuela today and tomorrow, but this is one of the key elements of this equation too. Very last, where does the Cuban democratic opposition stand right now? I think that everybody is observing very attentively what's happening in international sphere, but the challenge is again and again, Cuban independent civil society, both on the island and here, should really turn themselves into an effective force, which means meaningful level of unification. If you don't unify and create one unificating platform after another, your message to your international partners will be by definition weakened. So this is the key thing, and I hopeful that what we see today, and I don't want to offend all others, but I mentioned this encuentro cubanos now, are very relevant steps forward. Obviously, the key argument is not Cuban government or Fidel Castro and his cronies now in power, who are holders of sovereignty of Cuba. Sovereignty of Cuba belongs to Cuban people, and this is the basic fact that should be used, and you need to seek the support of international civil society to achieve that. I think that the only very strongly positive effect of all these RAO reforms is that Cubans from the island now more or less can travel and communicate in these settings, that you are really creating a new political nation of Cubans for the 21st century. It is a big thing, and all your political powers should do that. And challenges ahead, and this is my point, is Cuban government opposition capable to get finally really united and turn itself to a really unified voice of new Cuban political nation? Is Cuban democratic opposition capable to offer to the Cuban people a comprehensive and realistic political program for the successful transition of Cuba from their current desperate situation? Can Cuban democratic opposition get for this goal the recognition and support of key players of international society? And very last paragraph, it remains to be seen. But here too, in my opinion, people seek the inspiration in the political legacy of Václav Havel, connected with Charter 77, whose 40th anniversary we are just commemorating, and with the revolutions of 1989, which peacefully ended the era of totalitarianism in East Central Europe, and set all the countries in this region on the path of democracy. Their friends from this part of the world have been at their disposal in the past decades, and they will stay for sure on their side in the future as well. Thank you.
Our next speaker is a teacher who has read many different topics in his life. He died from the University of Havana in 2005 and migrated to the United States in 2010. Rodolfo Stosser is going to speak to us on Cuba and U.S. healthcare system, 1900 to 2016, similarities, differences, and efficiencies.
Well, thank you very much, President of ASCE, Elena, Gabriel, and all the members of the board, and Dr. Roger for inviting me to make this presentation. I will try to express 20 slides of essential Cuba's data, hard data. I have it in in 6 tables in the next. This table that is here is key. It shows the data that the World Health Organization and U.S. analysts showed to prove that in 2000 and even in 2010, the U.S. was twice inefficient than Cuba producing health, when a broader analysis would have shown that Cuba was second, really, at North Korea, the world's first country in health inefficiency due to top human life and health costs. In 2001, Los Angeles Times published "Old-fashioned doctrine keeps Cuban health in the nation may be one of the poorest nations in the world, but reports health index that rival those of rich countries such as the U.S. Cubans are absolute best at doing something with nothing. I have been 10 years in Cuba and 5 years in the U.S. studying and trying to decipher these parameters. And in the last years, I focused what is not measured but by the healthy life expectancy that was invented in Harvard to rank the performance of Cuba and U.S. national systems. We have to make some first clarification. There is one system in the United States, one system in Cuba that have different stages of that development. There is something very important. Every national health system has 2 big components: life support, health external sector, which is the environment of the national health system, and a healthcare internal sector, which is the core of the national health system. Really, is the heart of the national health system. Always, everything is discussed about national health system only about the core. The environment is not discussed, and it is very important. Another thing that is important is to classify the policies. There are ethical and efficient policies, but there are ethical and inefficient policies. There are unethical and efficient policies, and we will see that this of Cuba, and unethical and inefficient policies. It's very important. This is new. I have never heard about this. In 1917 to 1992, all the Soviet house socialization reforms did not show clearly their disastrous health results due to manipulation of figures and of causes. In addition, the quantity and quality of the patient and population health are still measured partially only by the delay of death, lack of illnesses, disability, and risk factors. This is done in Johns Hopkins and in Harvard. So, it's the top in the world. There is yet no integration of this negative health with the positive psychobiology, biological, socioeconomic, and mental health dimensions in a patient's global health. In this broad context, let's examine the impact of the last living health reforms of Cuba and the U.S. Our objectives first are to find Cuba and U.S. living health system and policy similarities, different degrees and causes of deficits before and after the reform process since the 1960s. and to suggest changes to respective living, support, health, general sector, and leave health care in general sector to improve the respective perspective. Well, there are the material matters we can pass quickly. Second constructive clarification. Today, individual leaf health can be defined as the complex and most probably interworking of various degrees of positive and negative physical, biological, socioeconomic, and mental health in time and space, rather than as the simple and less possible all or nothing absence of illness or presence of wellness beyond the repair shops of negative health and return to neutral health. We have to change the definition of health of the patient, because we are obstacles by this for the development of our healthcare attention in the world. We put here a patient health global equation, where you can see there that there is a subglobal health biological, positive health and negative health. There is mental, positive and negative, and there is global, also global health, social, positive and negative. All the healthcare system, that World Health Organization, and Harvard School of Public Health, and Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, they only analyze negative health and not positive health. And in general, most of all, physical health, biological. Results, we have here 4 system scans, 2 graphical trends, and 2 scans of Cuba and the US. Well, here you have the comprehensive approach to the vigorous democratic capitalist national living health system in United States 1964. You see that both internal and external sectors there, how they function. They were functioning well, with high efficiency. In Cuba, we have it too. In a certain way, we can say that from when Batista began in the ASCE of Cuba in 1933, we began a period of social democracy. In a certain way, I think that Batista tried to avoid the hard socialism, and then began some social reforms that stagnated in a certain way the economy, although it was always progressive. And here we have all these things. In the United States, I analyzed a light social democratic capitalist living health system since 1965 that began Medicare and Medicaid. This was impulsed by the ASCE in Europe of United States, and I think that in that moment it began the social democrat in a light way in the United States. And this has slowed all the development, especially in the internal health sector, and in a certain way this will justify the graphical trends we will see now. Well, in Cuba in 1959-2016, we have seen that everything has been repressed in the life support sector and in the healthcare sector too. Here we have the trends of some main human development index, life expectancy at birth, GDP, per capita, literacy, human rights. Although the United Nations Development Program doesn't include human rights as one of the basic components of their human development index. But I have worked with this, and this is very important too. Here we have in the United States an efficiency of the healthcare sector, or that the life expectancy as well as the healthy life expectancy at birth are not reflecting indirectly enough the quantity and quality of the lived integral health of the individual and population accordingly to the so progressive and privileged top world life support sectors of the United States. Look at the difference in 2016. Here we have a characterization of the development in the two periods of the United States, and how have been some changes since 1965, and why there is a tendency in the government to develop more the vigorous capitalism that we had before 1965. Here we have Cuba with the paradox. If you see, until 1957, we have more or less the same trend of development, but then the GDP began to descend in the 60s and more in the 90s, and we arrived to a situation where the life expectancy at birth is maintained with a lower GDP. This is a paradox for welfare and healthcare. For that principle that is practically observed in all the 193 countries. We can think that it's much efficiency of the health sector in Cuba, or that the life expectancy at birth as well as the health are not reflecting indirectly enough the quantity and quality of the lived integral population, held accordingly to the so regressive, appalling, and slow living conditions captive with forced work, walks, lines, and poor food, water, information, shelter, medicines, income, recreation, homes, everything that we have in Cuba today. Yes. How much? 4 minutes. Well, in the discussion, it's very important to analyze that when the Nazis regressed the Jewish atherosclerosis with forced starvation, march, work, and unrest through energy consumption in the concentration camps. There is another thing in the factors that may have played a role in Cuba, and is that neonatal environment is crucial for later health. And the Cuban system only take well care or better care only of the pregnant and of the baby until it has 1 year. After 1 year, that is more or less 21 months, after 1 year, they are in a regimen of deprivation of everything. And this helps in a certain way and force the people to have a style of life that is in a certain way is better. It's better than the freedom in electing your style of life. Let's pass something here. Here we classify the different policies of in ethical and unethical of the United States and Cuba in the two periods we are analyzing. Well, let's go to the conclusions. Cuba incurred more infantile infectious and less arteriosclerosis mortality, life expectancy and health expectancy healthy life expectancy at birth, with unacceptable unethical policies, apart of some ethical policies too, but with misleading figures too, without improving life, biophysical, socioeconomic, and mental integral health, quantity and quality of the embryo, fetus, child, mother, father, and especially the elder, has risen and all paragraphs conflicting wealthy researchers that use as the most advanced nation show similar morbid mortality figures as Cuba, most out-oppressed, without embargo, an impoverished nation in 1959 to 2060 never seen in the world. In this period that we are analyzing, the U.S. living support system, healthcare, industry, innovation, research system, and have distribute worldwide the most important package of life, health, science, ethics, communication, knowledge, technological platforms, innovation, contributing to equitable global living support and health care quality and equality, even equality, reform in this planet. Health efficiency will rise much more when in primary care the patient health be more comprehensively measured and promoted. It is used and equitable, wide and wise to complete gradually and smartly the health care for all coverage in a nation, in the degree that it does not charge the people with the highest cost of an abrupt suppression of human freedom and rights, depression of all living standards, a shift in democracy, fragmenting, distorting, slowing the growth of a higher quality and quality of life integral health, as Cuba case shows, with only life and health for an elite and middle class tourists in 1959 to 2016. Cuba's solution is liberate its people. That is the only solution. The U.S. and other governments, private charities, and United Nations, NGOs, etc., shall invest on research on the individual global levels to create new mathematical tools to measure life integral health, qualitative positive and negative magnitudes, and qualitative codes in real time and space. Avoiding full concentrations in partial policies and outcomes of disease and death, negative health. Impact over selected morbidity and mortality index. Perplexing fact that is putting at risk the accelerated train of integral human life, health, and civilization growth achieved in the last 250 years. The U.S. needs to find much more than how to reduce the health expectancy, the healthy life expectancy at birth and other ages, how to get a higher diffusion and incidence of live health, including more positive health in the primary care of the individual, family, community, to increase the quality of care and reduce most of the preventable costs. Thank you very much.
Now move to the fourth presentation. Joana Colombier is an educator, and she's also the director of the academy in Somos Más. She's going to speak to us la formación de liderazgo en la sociedad civil, una necesidad imperativa para Cuba presente.
Also a nurse.
agradezco sumamente la oportunidad de estar acá y poder compartir un poco de nuestra experiencia y de lo que desde la isla estamos tratando de hacer para lograr los cambios necesarios en este país. Uno de los grandes mitos en los cuales el gobierno cubano ha basado su legitimidad desde que Fidel Castro llegara al poder en 1959, evidentemente ha sido la educación. Ha basado quizás su legitimidad casi exclusivamente en este sector y en el sector de la salud, del cual ya anteriormente nuestro colega Rodolfo había hablado. Sin embargo, esto está basado en los bajos índices de alfabetización que existían no solo en Cuba, y esto es importante precisarlo, sino en toda Latinoamérica. La realidad de la educación en 1959 no era propia o exclusiva de Cuba. Sin embargo, es en 1959 donde comienza a haber una gran inversión en el sector educacional. El gobierno cubano basó esta historia que ha logrado solventar de una manera que ha permitido que prácticamente todo el mundo crea la realidad cubana como algo tan real, tan posible, que lo ve como ejemplo para todo el mundo. Nosotros quisiéramos estar tratando tres aspectos principales. En primer lugar, el mito del pasado. La alfabetización, el acceso universal y la importancia de los profesores. Un segundo momento que sería la realidad del presente. ¿Qué tan igual o diferente ha sido el presente de lo que fue un mito en el pasado? Y en tercer lugar, creo que no nos podemos quedar solamente en lo que pasó o en lo que tenemos, sino en la necesidad del futuro en el aspecto educacional. Como hemos dicho, Cuba basó este mito del pasado en tres aspectos fundamentales. El primero, la campaña de alfabetización. En 1961, el gobierno que accedió al poder comenzó la campaña de alfabetización basándose en que, según datos estadísticos, en las zonas urbanas existía un 11% de analfabetismo y en las zonas rurales un 47,1%. Se centró la atención en aproximadamente 1 millón de personas que no estaban alfabetizadas en el país. A finales de 1961 se había logrado la alfabetización del 75% de ese millón. Sin embargo, esta campaña era global, en la medida en que se lograba un mínimo conocimiento instructivo. También ya se comenzaba un férreo adoctrinamiento en las doctrinas de esta nueva revolución. Revolución que poco a poco fue adoctrinando en los principios marxistas y desarrollaba de una manera u otra, ya desde esos primeros momentos, el culto a la personalidad de Fidel Castro. El acceso universal a la educación fue otro de los mitos en los cuales, se ha basado el pasado de la educación en Cuba. Mientras la campaña de alfabetización se desarrollaba y seguía su curso, evidentemente el índice de matriculación en las escuelas iba aumentando. Estos índices de matriculación en las escuelas se multiplicó por 2 una década después. Sin embargo, el gobierno presentó programas para distintos sectores poblacionales que hasta el momento no habían sido beneficiados y no habían sido vistos como programas importantes, y junto a la recién inaugurada organización de guarderías comenzó esta nueva visión para esa educación en Cuba. Sin embargo, desde la década del 90, el índice de admisión escolar ha ido disminuyendo según los propios datos de la Oficina Nacional de Estadísticas e Información. En esa época, el 94% de los escolares llegaba al 5º grado, en contraste con el 74% de la región. Pero sin embargo, estamos hablando ya de porcientos que no llegaban realmente a ese mito que ya en el pasado había sido a una aparente realidad para el país. Los índices de matriculación en las escuelas secundarias ya estaban a un 78% para el sexo masculino y un 82% para el femenino. Otro aspecto en los cuales basó este mito del pasado fue en la importancia del maestro. El maestro comenzó a ser el centro de la atención del sistema educacional porque era precisamente el maestro el que lograba adoctrinar a ese estudiante. Si nuestro eminente Félix Varela había dicho que no quería cerebro de esponja, Fidel Castro evidentemente quería exclusivamente cerebro de esponja. Que recepcionaran una mentalidad y que no fueran capaces de sacar de adentro como un concepto de educación, sino entrar solamente información. La realidad del presente ha sido totalmente diferente a aquel mito. Una disminución del presupuesto asignado a educación año tras año. De hace 5 años hacia acá ha habido una disminución considerable del presupuesto asignado al sistema educacional, lo cual tiene implicaciones sobre todo en la calidad de la estancia y de los estudiantes durante la jornada docente. Esta disminución del presupuesto ha llevado a que no se hagan nuevas inversiones en educación, a que los centros escolares, con toda la realidad, estén siendo deteriorados, sin contar el desvío evidente de los pocos recursos asignados a este sector. Disminución de los índices de retención escolar, retención en el ciclo y retención de inicio-inicio, sobre todo la retención en el ciclo de la enseñanza técnica profesional. Carencia de personal docente. Cuba sigue diciéndole al mundo que tiene un maestro cada 42 estudiantes, pero lo hace globalmente. Sin embargo, cada una de las enseñanzas tiene un % diferente de estudiantes, de maestros que deben estar por cada estudiante. Esto implica que Cuba diga que tiene maestros y a la vez reconozca al inicio de todos los cursos escolares que no tienen suficientes maestros para poder solventar la situación escolar del país. Esto ha llevado también a que muchos maestros del oriente del país, sobre todo, sean asignados a La Habana como capital del país, como una de las provincias con mayores carencias de maestros que han salido de su profesión por el siguiente aspecto: desmotivación e insatisfacción profesional de los docentes. No solo en el aspecto económico, que ya es importante, sino también en el aspecto del reconocimiento social y moral ante una sociedad que en un momento tenía al maestro como centro de referencia. Hoy evidentemente no es así. Ausencia de valores éticos y morales y manifestaciones frecuentes de falta de educación. Cuba no fue ni es el país más culto del mundo. Esto es una realidad. Querer denunciarlo ha sido uno de los mayores errores porque las evidencias prácticas han demostrado que no es así. La fórmula de instrucción más masividad no significa necesariamente educación ni calidad. Y esto es importante. Cuba ha basado su pensamiento educacional en la masividad como evidencia de calidad, lo cual ha llevado realmente a cambios sustanciales y a mediocridad en la vida social y en la vida económica del país. Ahora, la necesidad del futuro. Más de medio siglo de censura en todos los medios de información y un férreo adoctrinamiento escolar han producido efectos profundos en la capacidad de análisis y por ende en la posibilidad de participación creciente en la vida pública de los cubanos. Este contexto fue creado especialmente por Fidel y su aparato de control, que solo permitían reconocer en el ideario nacional una sola visión legítima y moral del mundo. Fuera de su visión legítima y moral, no era posible presentar otras. Su hermano Raúl ha continuado cómodamente aplicando el mismo método. De manera que cualquier intento democratizador necesitado del capital humano indispensable, se encuentra ante un problema permanente y general: la falta de conocimiento y cultura política y cívica. Los movimientos de la sociedad civil en Cuba agrupan a miles de jóvenes de todas las provincias del país que se caracterizan por sus valores personales y cualidades de liderazgo. No obstante, hemos comprobado que es necesario pulirlos para fortalecer su estructura de pensamiento, así como su comportamiento y habilidades prácticas. El Partido Comunista es el principal adversario de cualquier iniciativa democrática. Cuenta con escuelas de formación de cuadros provinciales, municipales, nacionales e incluso internacionales, evidenciando la importancia que le da a la capacitación y a la preparación. Pero la estrategia de los comunistas o de los que dicen serlo no se limita a prepararse bien para disfrazar sus mentiras, sino que al mismo tiempo prohíben estudios superiores a aquellos que piensan diferente. Evidencias tenemos en la realidad cubana de hoy. Por todo lo anterior, se hace indispensable que las organizaciones que aspiran o no a constituirse en partidos políticos no solo se concentren en la denuncia o la crítica al sistema, muchas veces redundante y recurrente hasta el cansancio, sino que se ocupen de la formación de sus miembros, especialmente de sus líderes, para que puedan estructurar en su discurso verdaderas propuestas alternativas al poder. Y aún más importante, para que con su ejemplo de buenas prácticas demuestren que si el pueblo los apoya, defenderán cargos políticos con mayor responsabilidad, transparencia, inteligencia y espíritu democrático. A partir de esta realidad y en este contexto, se ha hecho necesario consolidar espacios de aprendizaje. Uno de ellos es el que desde hace 2 años propone nuestro movimiento, que es la Academia de Estudios 10-10. 10-10 porque preparamos o iniciamos con la idea de preparar en cada curso, en cada ciclo de estudios, 10 estudiantes en 10 asignaturas durante 10 días. La experiencia nos ha llevado a ampliarlo a otras áreas, sobre todo al área digital, y basado en 3 principios: instrucción, educación y acción. Es decir, no es solo brindar instrucción, proveer educación, sino que esto tiene que revertirse en proyectos socioeconómicos, en proyectos reales que puedan transformar no la Cuba completa, sino la Cuba en la cual vives. Las últimas décadas del siglo XX y las primeras del XXI han corroborado el papel preponderante que juega la educación en el desarrollo socioeconómico de las naciones. La idea de la creación de una sociedad del conocimiento, más que una tendencia, parece ser ya una realidad y constituye un reto para la proyección futura educacional de nuestro país. No cabe duda que este reto no puede enfrentarse al margen del desarrollo del hombre, que es en esencia quien gesta, promueve y produce los cambios sociales. Son precisamente los sistemas educativos quienes tienen la responsabilidad de formar a los hombres en tales empeños. Todo cambio en Cuba tiene que pasar necesariamente y en primera instancia por el cambio de mentalidad. Las recientes aperturas económicas en el área del contrapropismo han demostrado que no solo es necesaria una apertura económica,
Assign discussion fulfilled, so we have to complete the responsibilities of discuss with the present paper, and then discuss the local paper, and also discuss Joanna's paper. Let me start with this paper. It's very wide-ranging in addressing a rather difficult topic, and he does a number of things very well, and but some of them don't fit quite together, they're difficult. One of the things that he does very well is demonstrate that blacks in Cuba have achieved far more accomplishments as members of society job of that. I think that it doesn't matter what definition of racism you pick, the one that is a social construct or the genetic one, that statement applies to both, so there's no point in arguing about that. I don't agree with him, not necessarily on the emphasis. I think it's very worthwhile, the research alone, bringing out the genetic definition, and that's commendable. I'm not so sure I want to pick one versus the other. I think that racism is a state of mind in which you visualize other people that are different from you in negative ways. And whether you want to define that as a social construct or not, it does have consequences. And I think that the consequences are combining social and economic. I think a lot of the racism that existed in Cuba by this broad definition manifested itself in the fact that blacks had, as a proportion of the population, lower standards of living than whites in Cuba and in the U.S. And that doesn't contradict the fact that they also had accomplished more in Cuba than in the U.S. But I don't think you want to get into things saying there was no racism in Cuba. That's I don't know. I was at the African American Museum in Washington, which was recently inaugurated with 2 grandchildren. Right? It does a wonderful job of showing the evolution of blacks in the U.S. And one of the things that it does is it tries to point out that historically, blacks participated far more in their own incorporation in American society than the historians give it credit. So if you study history in the U.S. in the last 30 years, or that, up to about 10 years ago, you probably had a perception that blacks were sort of liberated by whites. One of the things that this museum destroys that perception, and I think that doesn't contradict anything he said, but it's good to point that out. I think it's a paper worth reading, even though it has this sort of components that you might fight against each other at some point. It's quite a donation. Then into Martin's presentation, I think that as any Cuban devoted to human rights knows, we are very grateful to checks for their legal human rights. And he tried to provide some guidance on how we should continue to support that struggle. And I think that that's very valuable. I think that his goal for unity is very worthwhile. And I would also like to link that to the presentation of Ivana, because I think that her discussion of the role of education in providing members of society that can really help the society was really impressive. And she provides an example of a civil institution that is being created in Cuba and is evolving right now that we should all support. Now with that, I'll pass on to Nick to explore.
Ayer se encontró aquí un flash drive que debe haber traído alguien que con el costo del Banco Americano de Integración. El dueño aparece.
Flash drive that has been found. So if anybody has found it,
I found the flash drive. Is that yours?
my comments will be brief, but on the other hand, I do want to go just beyond one single paper. I was very impressed with the paper that I have to review in terms of putting a lot of emphasis on mental health. And I think that when people talk about medical issues, they do not realize the importance of mental health. This is especially true in the case of Cuba, because there is a book that I highly recommend to you by Perez Jr., I forget his first name, but it is about suicide in Cuba. And people don't realize that Cuba has had, prior to the revolution and after the revolution, some of the highest suicide rates in the world. Therefore, by ignoring the mental health issue, people are really not paying attention to something that is very crucial in Cuba. So I really praise this paper. I learned a lot because I am not a medical doctor, and the information that it has is quite fantastic. I also want to mention, because Batista was mentioned briefly, and I want to remind you that in the 1940s, Batista ran under a coalition of social democrats, socialist democrats. And that is something, and received actually the support of the Communist Party in Cuba. And Batista, in fact, also made a great deal of effort to improve analphabetismo in the rural areas. And as a matter of fact, Batista tried to introduce a lot of schools in the rural areas, and he was very much disliked for that. In other words, instead of paying attention to the urban areas, paying attention to the rural areas. But I do want to make one final comment, which is very general, which is that, when we talk about moral values, when we talk about mental health, when we talk about human rights, and when we talk about racial issues, these are four issues that are very important to the welfare of a population. And I think that a lot of people do not like to talk about those things. And of course, also education is something that now we interpret as education in the public schools. But if you look back at education, let us say in Germany in the 18th century and even 19th century, education was obtained through work. And of course, values were obtained through religion. And Cuba, regrettably, was very weak in terms of religion and in terms of moral values and so on and so forth. And I think these are four issues that we really need to talk a great deal more about. And I think that in a sense, this session has been important because it has dealt with those issues. Thank you very much.
I will do some comments about the UN work, and I think that was a very good panoramic view of the problems of education, beginning with the myth that there was bad education in Cuba. That's not right. The alphabetization campaign, or the literalization campaign that was in Cuba in 1961. I remember after decades that I talked with people that worked in them, that they inflated the numbers of the people that were educated educated and have the literacy certificate. My father, that had a second year of bachelor in Cuba, in the La Salle school in Santiago of Cuba, my father was again tested to see if he had the 6th grade in the revolution. So everything was inflated and was every figure in Cuba, not only the economic figures, the health figures and the education figures and every figures have been handled by the government. The censure and the distortion of the information, I think that is the cost that the Cubans cannot go out of the trap, of the socialist trap that they have, because it has been so cruel, that censure and distortion of all the information about the reality, that they cannot think well. They live out of the reality in general. The indoctrination is from the beginning, from the pioneers before the preschooler period. So they begin very early in the infantile circles or daycares. One thing that I suffered a lot from the beginning that she didn't mention, the paralysis of the critic, of the criticism. That is something that is very important in Cuba. There was a journal, Critical Thought, in the university that was eliminated in the year 1970 with the Department of Philosophy that was very advanced with a lot of ideas of all the world, and was closed. The Department of Philosophy in 1970 was eliminated, Critical Thought, and that was forever. And that is very important in the educational system of Cuba. She talked about exclusion of the some university studies. This is the first years because of political criteria. The society of knowledge, without access to in the library to all the types of books, communist and capitalist, Democrat and totalitarians, and without access to internet for all the people, is something that is absurd. It cannot go. This society of the information of knowledge is not possible, and that is why somebody. A lot of people in the United States don't understand why the people do not rebel and go to the streets in massive way, but the people are living out of the reality, mentally living out of the reality. There is a very aggressive environment, social environment, a part of the physical, that is affecting the mental state of all the human individuals and populations. So that is the problem that we have had for practically 60 years. And well, I want to acknowledge this good work and this discussion of Joanna for her presentation.
Thank you. Okay, we now open it up to questions and comments from the audience to any of the panels. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah. And then you go to the microphone. Go to the microphone.
No, yo creo que yo tengo una voz que me oyen bien, ¿no? Así que, muchas gracias. La pregunta mía es al profesor que hizo, y valga la redundancia, la pregunta de What if Batista was black. Usted nunca oyó hablar ni conoció a Orestes Ferrar, el doctor Orestes Ferrar.
No lo conozco.
Fue uno de los fundadores de la República. Y estando representando a Cuba en la ONU, vi una persona que se acercó a él y le dijo: doctor, su presidente parece negro. Y él se vio y le dijo: usted está equivocado, parece blanco. Porque Batista era mulato, solo sabía todo el mundo. Batista era mulato. Y eso fue una anécdota interesantísima. Por eso yo creo que el doctor Ferrari le contestó a usted su pregunta.
Gracias. No, le traje el video primero.
Quiero hacer varias observaciones. No sé si era así, yo sé que van a empezar después de trabajo, estando en Cuba, como tiene las limitaciones de información y demás, me imagino que le cuesta trabajo usar la me parece que 1 millón de analfabetos antes de la revolución no me parece que no se todo inflado. Me parece que es mucho menos, habría que buscar aquí y comparar con otros países. Porque Cuba siempre tuvo una observación que siempre se nos olvida. Cuba no era el FIA hasta el 59. Cuba siempre estaba en el primer lugar, Argentina, Uruguay, Cuba, en todos los índices. Entonces esa cifra me parece probablemente sea de reino, o quizás usted ha podido, esa parte de uno. Otra cosa, quisiera preguntar, otra observación quiero hacer. La escuela, la educación en Cuba no es grande, porque ahora la tiraron recientemente, pero estaban la escuela del campo y la escuela en el campo. Y la escuela del campo y la escuela en el campo decían que ese era el aporte que uno daba a la sociedad para pagar un poco toda la educación supuestamente gratis que dan. Es decir, que nunca ha sido gratis, se pagaba con el trabajo infantil del niño de 12 años a 16 años. Nunca, aunque creo que la quitaron hace poco, usted hace ya por cuánto tiempo la quitaron. La escuela del campo y la escuela del campo. Eso sería ahora me tiene una pregunta.
Una pregunta, ¿no?
Pues déjame hacer un último comentario. Yo también estudié un poco la parte del suicidio en Cuba, ¿no? Antes de la revolución había suicidio, pero no era como vino después. La cifra de suicidio en Cuba era la primera en América y la primera en el mundo, eso sí. Y dado cifras de ellos mismos, esta parte también. Yo creo que estamos a nivel de Noruega, Suecia, Japón. Una preguntita, se mantuvo la cuestión de los muchachos esos que se gradúan de 9º grado, de 12 grados, para dar clases a niños de secundaria, y la cuestión de las clases con video y esas cosas se mantiene, por eso lo quitaron, podríamos ser maestros un poco con más formación, más años.
Bien, gracias. Paul, tercero, Frank, viene hablando en clase.
Thank you, Roger. You began the session saying there wasn't a common theme. Obviously, it was a very, very common theme. This. The mic is not. Is that close enough? Yeah. You began the session saying there was no common theme. I think there is a common theme. This about Cuba. One of the myths I can't resist here is a Czech contribution. My father, who had a small plant in Cuba, spoke very good Spanish, was in Prague in the late 60s. And knowing of his interest, they organized a dinner with some Czechs who had just returned from distant Cuba, who were viciously upset that they as taxpayers were financing Cuba. It turned out their figures were, and it was quite correct, that Cuba had 4 times the automobiles per capita, 5 times the TV sets per capita, etc. The myth of poor Cuba needing the Comecon assistance was overdone, shall we say. I do ask Nicolas Sanchez if in his paper he would follow the prescription of dictator Adolfo Pinochet once when he criticized him and said, "Deme el número de su carnet." The gentleman who criticized him then for the Argentine war fast. In this case, many of us have read some of the far better books that he mentioned, where Batista's origins, Batista's implications, the integration of Cuba, which by far exceeded that of the U.S., was very clear. I think it would be helpful in your paper if you pointed out who are the SOBs who are now claiming that until Fidel arrived, you had Alabama sheriffs in charge of Havana. I was impressed with some of the comments that you made about some of them. I think we would like to know who are these people who are lying. It would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. Armando, no, Frank was first.
Muchas gracias por todas las presentaciones en la mañana de hoy. Solamente quería hacer un comentario sobre la presentación de Nicolás Sánchez sobre la raza de Batista. Sabía históricamente que Cuba, antes de la revolución, había sido bastante progresista en distintos temas, pero no conocía sobre lo avanzado que era Cuba con respecto a la raza, teniendo acceso al poder en el Senado y en la Cámara y en otros altos niveles, en personas de color o de razas mezcladas. Posterior al triunfo de la revolución, y más bien para hablar de lo que viví, de 25 años viviendo en Cuba, nosotros no vemos la raza o problemas de raza como un problema. Pero hemos visto figuras en la cultura, en el deporte, en la política, en todas las esferas, lo vemos como algo natural. No lo vemos como una distinción de personas de color que han tenido ese acceso o no. Creo que fue interesante ver todo el punto de vista de cómo, amén de todo lo que Batista hizo históricamente, pero tener un presidente democráticamente elegido en los años 40, una raza mezclada, para no decir ni blanco ni negro, creo que en comparación con otros países fue un avance bien grande, como decir, Barack Obama elegido en este siglo, tuvimos nuestro Barack Obama en Cuba casi un siglo antes de que pasara. Le agradezco su presentación y como joven me ilustró mucho sobre la historia de Cuba antes durante toda esa época. Gracias.
Cuando Fidel Castro llegó al poder, dijo famosamente que el problema racial en Cuba se había solucionado. El punto del papel del estudio de Nicolás es que no había tal problema racial mayúsculo en Cuba antes de la revolución. Bueno, esta no es una pregunta, pero es una sugerencia para más research. En la Asamblea Nacional hay 612 miembros. En el Consejo de Estado, al presidente, al vicepresidente y 5 más vicepresidentes y 23 ministros. Sería útil ver la composición del Consejo de Estado y de la Asamblea. Y me resulta sorprendente el número minúsculo de negros y mulatos en esos dos programas del Estado. Gracias.
Yo vengo de Cuba y voy a hacer dos preguntas. Voy a hacer una sugerencia, voy a decir algo y voy a hacer una pregunta a Giovanna. La primera, Giovanna, nosotros en el año 2012, en julio de 2012, fundamos una consejería jurídica, un grupo de abogados, y elaboramos un programa de estudio de 110 horas, donde incluimos temas de derechos generales, de derechos humanos y además de cívica. Como se conoce, desapareció esa asignatura por la revolución de la enseñanza en el Cuba. A nosotros nos resulta extremadamente difícil dar los talleres a los grupos de oposición cuando hablaban de que hay que darle preparación a los dirigentes. Estamos tratando de hacerlo desde el 2012. Cada uno de los 8 abogados tiene que dar 2 como mínimo talleres mensuales y sin embargo casi siempre nos impiden, cuando no me detienen al abogado antes de llegar al lugar donde se va a impartir el taller, impiden que lleguen, o sea, llega el abogado pero no llegan
que van a recibir el taller. ¿Cómo ustedes lo logran? Porque creo que entendí que decías que ustedes le daban preparación a 10 personas, le iban dando preparación como ustedes lo logran sin la interferencia de la seguridad del Estado.
¿Usted es de?
Yo soy de Cuba.
Sí, pero ¿de qué?
A mi nombre es Raúl Luis Disco Pérez, de la Segunda Garantista de Abogados Independientes. Ok. Y la otra, lo otro que le voy a decir al señor que habló sobre el racismo, nosotros hicimos un estudio allá en la provincia de Pinar del Río y en todas las tiendas recaudadoras de divisas hemos encontrado que solo hay 2 personas negras trabajando en tiendas recaudadoras de divisas. O sea, la inmensa mayoría de los trabajadores en las tiendas recaudadoras de divisas son de la raza blanca.
Gracias. Okay. Let me, Martin wanted to say something, so let me start with you guys. Martin, you want to address any questions or very comments, and then we'll go that way.
First of all, when I got the invitation to participate in this panel, I was concerned about too much of diversity, but the contributions really convinced me that I was playing wrong because all these 3 topics covered here, interracial relations and the complicated aspects of Cuban history. I'm frankly speaking would be very much interested in having broader and more advanced picture of Fulgencio Batista than the one which is traditionally shared in the historical textbooks. I think that the same thing is about the healthcare. Healthcare in the context of totalitarian regimes gets a very specific context, and obviously you have all these illusions about the best system in the world that Cuba apparently has, and then mental health and the situation of hungry people in that moment, and obviously education. I think it's really the point how to get started. But just to finish my international perspective, in our history, we have Pictou connected with President Fundador Tumac Masari, who always tried to send a signal to his Czech fellow the patriots. Try to think your Czech question from more worldly perspective. Understand yourself better and maybe to formulate more efficient policies. I think that's exactly what now is the challenge for Cubans. As your partner, the long-time diplomat, I would say that Cubans spend sometimes too much time, for obvious reasons, to see the world from their own perspective, so that they see traitors everywhere, because frustration is, I would say, common denominator of many perceptions. Try to ask at least a question how you are perceived by others. And I'm telling you that Cuba can be seen as a great hope for the world. Fidel Castro formulated very efficient international policies that really maybe confused many people around the world, but it was efficient. I think that this is the biggest challenge for Cuban development opposition, to formulate your efficient policy, which certainly would be able to overcome this horrible legacy of Fidel Castro. Thank you.
Okay. Joana, ¿quiere responder a la pregunta?
Sí, respecto a al primer comentario sobre las cifras oficiales, la estadística es una parte que ha ido desarrollándose con los años, sobre todo se le ha dado mayor importancia en los últimos años, y hay estadísticas oficiales y hay estadísticas extraoficiales. Evidentemente la UNED no estaba fundada en 1961, por tanto no hay cifras oficiales del gobierno, pero sí, y de hecho los datos que estamos tomando solamente son las cifras en los años recientes de la UNED, o sea, las cifras que ponen en cuanto después de su surgimiento. Ahora, en el año 1958, la Iglesia Católica, que tenía determinado acceso al censo y a hacer algunas investigaciones, pues es quien ofrece estas cifras. En nuestro trabajo, en el informe escrito en nuestro trabajo, pues están los links referidos a esto. Es importante que sepamos algo. 1 millón de analfabetos no es una cifra, vamos a decir, trascendente. Y lo que comentamos, la situación en Cuba no era totalmente diferente a la del resto de Latinoamérica. No es que se estaba poniendo como que era algo. El gobierno cubano ha tratado de hacerlo ver como que era la peor situación de Latinoamérica cuando no era la peor situación de Latinoamérica. Es decir, se maneja solamente esa cifra, parece como que, oigan, qué terrible, pero era una realidad contextual, era una realidad propia del momento histórico, como lo era en otros aspectos en los cuales el gobierno cubano trataba de hacer ver que la situación en Cuba era más caótica, sin embargo era similar de manera general a la situación que existía. O sea, esos eran los estándares que normalmente existían. Cuando decíamos que aproximadamente 1 millón de analfabetos, 750.000 fueron básicamente alfabetizados, o sea, un 75%. En cuanto a la escuela del campo y la escuela en el campo, estos fueron 2 de los proyectos, vamos a decir, más difíciles de asumir para la familia cubana, porque implicaban incluso su no participación en ellos, implicaba casi que el futuro de ese estudiante. No participar en una escuela de campo podría implicar incluso el no seguimiento de estudios superiores. Hace aproximadamente 5 años se eliminaron las escuelas en el campo, las SBEC y los IPUE, más por una cuestión económica que por una cuestión realmente de entender que constituían, o sea, de una cuestión social. Es decir, el sistema educacional cubano no podía seguir sosteniendo todo lo que implicaba, la logística que implicaba las escuelas en el campo, es decir, de los muchachos que estaban generalmente 11 días en la escuela y solamente 3 días de pase en su casa. Las escuelas al campo, que es los 45 días, 40 días, esto sí se mantiene, de manera general sí se mantiene, y lo que se buscan generalmente alternativas de que no siempre son en los 45 días en un campo, sino que almuerzos escolares, incluso se ha llegado ya hasta empresas o algunos otros componentes de la economía necesitan ayuda. En cuanto a los maestros emergentes, junto con la educación a través de videoclases y teleclases, fue uno de los elementos que más dañó el sistema educacional en Cuba. Como sistema, si afecta una de sus partes, evidentemente está afectando todo el sistema. Hoy todavía están graduándose de la universidad los estudiantes que fueron los primeros que utilizaron este sistema del que tenemos conocimiento antes de implantarse. Fue totalmente desestimado por un gran porcentaje de los educadores en Cuba. Sin embargo, no fue aceptado estos criterios por Fidel, que es quien impone este sistema. Todavía existe maestro de medicina y todavía se dan videoclases, todavía se dan teleclases, y una de las grandes dificultades de esto está en que generalmente el maestro, que para especializarse en una asignatura, como uno requiere años de estudio y aún pasa toda la vida y no puede realmente decir conozco todo de mi especialidad, le es difícil especializarse en una asignatura. Cuánto más difícil no es especializarse en 5, 6, 7 asignaturas, como se supone que un maestro emergente de la secundaria básica debía saber. Esto hacía que los maestros pusieran y aún pongan el televisor, los muchachos están oyendo que yo creo que tengo un duda así, vamos a repetir ese pedazo. Echan contra el televisor, vamos a verlo de nuevo, porque el profesor no sabe dar una explicación, porque sencillamente no tiene conocimiento. El nivel de la calidad de educación en Cuba ha bajado, entre otras razones, y fundamentalmente por el nivel de la calidad de los profesores. Hoy en Cuba no existe un maestro, hoy en Cuba no existe docente. El modelo de maestro normalista, eso se ha perdido totalmente y nada tiene que ver con la realidad de un maestro en Cuba. Eso creo que fueron de manera general los 3 comentarios que me hiciste. Me alegra mucho que esté alguien acá de la corriente gramatista, pues tenemos relaciones con algunos como Integrando, etcétera, que nos han compartido con nosotros. Bueno, nosotros comentamos que hace 2 años comenzamos con el proyecto de la Academia 1010 con la visión inicial de preparar a 10 alumnos durante 10 días en 10 asignaturas, en 3 ciclos de estudio. La primera vez que lo hicimos, el primer ciclo, funcionó bien. Nosotros hemos tenido que cambiar las estrategias. La estrategia ha sido porque evidentemente eso me ha costado a mí detenciones, me ha costado deportaciones internas dentro de la isla, como le ha costado. Esta realidad es común a todo el que quiera, sobre todo preparar en Cuba. Preparar en Cuba, cualquiera diría, bueno, eso no es tan complejo que usted pueda reunir a 10 personas y lograr una preparación. No, no hay nada más complejo ni más miedo que le pueda tener el régimen que al conocimiento que libera al ser humano. Eso es en Cuba uno de los puntos más difíciles de lograr, liberar a través del conocimiento. Nosotros hemos utilizado varias alternativas. Y una de las alternativas está siendo la utilización de discos compactos, de dividir, y que nos ha permitido a la vez extenderlos mucho más. Ellos no saben cuándo repartimos los discos ni las maneras en que los repartimos. Y mensualmente o 2 veces al mes en cada una de nuestras sedes, que tenemos 4 sedes en Cuba, en 4 regiones, pues se hace un encuentro, muchas veces frustrado y otras veces no frustrado. Esa realidad no la estamos viviendo. No hay manera de decir, no, nuestro método es este y es único. Y realmente nos ha dado todo, hemos tenido que ir adaptando los métodos pedagógicos a la realidad del contexto de cada momento.
Nada más una pregunta, ¿qué impacto desde el punto de vista de la educación informal ven ustedes con relación a, tengo entendido que ha habido un aumento de los teléfonos celulares extraordinarios, millones, y el problema del internet? ¿Ustedes pueden evaluar qué impacto ha tenido en el nivel de sensibilización y de conocimiento general de la población?
Bueno, el tema del impacto es grande desde el punto de vista social, pero vamos a decir no desde el punto de vista educativo ni de conocimiento. Acceder a internet en Cuba es sumamente caro y cuando alguien accede a internet pues lo hace casi exclusivamente para poderse comunicar con sus familiares en el exterior y para poder acceder de momento rápido a una red social, pero a buscar el conocimiento y actualizarse políticamente, actualizarse socialmente no es posible. Nosotros hemos estado utilizando también para el tema de la academia una plataforma que pienso que la conozcan bastante acá, que es Apretarte, es propio para Cuba y en convenio con ellos pues se está mandando información a través de esto, que es utilizando Nauta, pero realmente el impacto es grande.
Breve, porque ya tenemos que terminar la sesión. Rodolfo, ¿tienes algo que responder, comentar? Bueno.
All right, I want to address the issue that race is a state of mind, because in part it is correct, but in part it is totally wrong. And I will illustrate that with an experience that I had. I have had a lot of skin cancer. And I went to a very famous hospital in Massachusetts to be seen by a new dermatologist for my skin cancer. And the first thing she said to me, she said, you know, your situation is really great. You know, I was very surprised. And she said, because you see, you are so dark. How could you have so much skin cancer? So what I did was I took my pants off and I showed her my behind. And once she saw my behind, she said, oh, I'm sorry. I thought just because you were Sanchez that you were, you know, dark. So in that regard, it is true that racism is a state of mind. But it is not a state of mind when it comes to health. And you see, even in the United States today, there are treatments approved by the government that are given only to black people and not to whites. They are not acceptable for white people because race makes a big difference in terms of medical treatment. Now, the question was raised about who are these people who argue about that. Well, Britannica Encyclopedia, you find that Batista is not mentioned at all as the race.
But Britannica is defunct.
Okay, it turns out that the chair of the other session, you know, has written a lot about race in terms of there has been a tremendous amount of racism in Cuba. And also, the main person with regard to race is De La Fuente, who has made a big deal that, race in Cuba, that there were tremendous problems and so on and so forth. And they are mentioned in my paper. Okay, one final comment, which is related to what Frank mentioned, that he learned about Batista and things he did not know and so on and so forth. Well, you see, that is why I didn't want to address the current situation in Cuba and racism, because I want this paper to reach Cuba, and so that people in Cuba learn about famous black people who gained political power. And I mean, one of the things that is very surprising in Cuba, they always talk about Nicolás Guillén, as a poor man, his father was a senator, he had an exquisite education, versus Batista, who was a very, very poor man, and was able to go from being an extremely poor man to being head of state under free elections in the 1940s. Regrettably, the problem in Cuba is that the Cuban population has always been very liberal. And do remember that Batista was elected as a free president under the heading of democratic socialism. And the things that Castro has done, including the thing about alphabetization, that was done by Batista too. And people forget. Many of the things that Castro did when he came into power were an imitation of many policies that had been conducted under Batista, but now it is forgotten. And of course, Batista was a very evil man, but, he was a man of the people. And I do believe that in order to make an impact in Cuba, the leaders have to be people of mixed race.
Una observación y ya, with the next session.
Como saben, mi nombre es Paulina del Castillo. Felicito al señor Palau por lo que dijo, que los cubanos nos miramos nosotros y no miramos de la perspectiva de otros países, o cómo otros países nos pueden ver. Por mi trabajo he viajado por muchos lugares. Y las cosas que me dicen en relación a Cuba demuestran que la propaganda de Castro al exterior, con todos sus accomplishments, ha llegado a
Gracias. Thank you for coming.